The dress had started as a mistake. A loose sketch on a napkin in the corner of a dim cafe, her fingers smudged with charcoal, her cup of tea already cold. It had been the kind of idea born not from trend forecasts or fabric samples, but from frustration. From wanting to make something that didn't exist yet. Something bold, flawed, alive. At the time, she didn't even own a sewing machine. She borrowed one. Taught herself from internet videos and scraps left over from a community college costume department. She stitched at night, ripped seams with her teeth, cut patterns from paper grocery bags. The first version barely held together. The second was wearable. The third made a stranger stop her on the subway. That was the moment. Not the compliments, not the eventual followers, but that stranger's eyes, real recognition. And so she kept going. Years passed, not with lightning strikes, but with steady rain. Pop-up markets, broken needles, sketchbooks filled with promises she couldn't afford to cut. More rejections than meals. One brand meeting where she was told, "You've got talent, but not the right image." So she worked in silence, built in the shadows. Every paycheck from the cafe where she worked went into fabric. Every hour she wasn't behind a counter, she was behind a machine. Until one day, a single photo changed everything. A customer posted an image, wearing her dress, no filters, no poses, just joy. It went viral. Then the orders came. Too many. She had to quit the cafe, had to hire help, had to learn how to scale. She refused to license, refused to sell. Every investor wanted her to clean the brand, package it, flatten it. She said no. She started her own label. Her name didn't go on the front. She chose something abstract, symbolic, elegant, because she didn't want fame. She wanted control. Eventually, her designs ended up in the windows of places like this boutique. But not by chance. She handpicked every retailer, signed every contract with her own pen. Every tag, every thread, every marketing image, filtered through her team. No compromise. Not because she wanted power, because she had fought too hard to let anyone else define beauty again. And now, years later, she stood in one of those stores. Overlooked, underdressed, invisible, and still, watching her creation hang under fluorescent spotlights while someone whispered that she couldn't afford it. The irony didn't sting. Confirmed everything she already knew. This wasn't about class. It was about blindness. About how even in success, some people are trained not to see what doesn't match their script. She ran her hand across the dress's hem, felt the invisible seam, right where she used to hide her initials before the brand was born. They were still there, still hers. And in this moment, the room didn't belong to the boutique. It belonged to her. They just didn't know it yet. She let the moment breathe, the dress in her hands, the smirks behind her, the weight of assumption dripping off every syllable the sales associates didn't say. They weren't villains. They were patterns. The kind of people boutiques hire for the look, not the vision. Hired to filter the room, to curate the clientele. They saw her as static on their radar background, not broadcast. And that was exactly what she needed. Because when the world expects nothing from you, every truth becomes a reveal. She placed the dress over her arm and wandered the boutique slowly, not pretending to browse but observing, noting how far the brand had been diluted in her absence. The scent wrong, too artificial. The music, detached from her original aesthetic. The mannequins, styled to echo someone else's trend book. Her designs had been made for motion, not display, for skin and spirit, not spotlights. But here, they hung like trophies, behind invisible velvet ropes. She breathed in, held the air, then walked toward the counter. The two women stiffened slightly. She laid the dress down gently, carefully, as if returning it to something sacred. The taller associate leaned forward, tapping away at the screen with rehearsed rhythm. Price appeared on the screen. For digits tied to years of her life, to cramped apartments, midnight shifts, burned fingertips, and rejection emails. The woman behind the desk raised an eyebrow. "Do you want me to hold it for you?" she asked, voice laced with calculation. She paused, then smiled, small, sharp, and final. "No," she said. "I'm here for a fitting." Silence. Pause long enough to tremble. Then came the apology, thinly veiled in policy. "Sorry. Fitting rooms are by appointment only, and only for confirmed clients." Another smile from her, colder now, because they didn't recognize her. And that was the final sign. This boutique no longer knew its source. It had become a costume of her vision, a performance of exclusivity. It was time to correct the narrative. She reached into her bag, pulled out a narrow envelope, white, embossed, unbranded, laid it beside the dress. Inside, a contract, not a threat, a statement, one that outlined the ownership of the label, the terms of distribution, the clause that allowed her to remove her designs from any retailer at will. And at the top, the logo, her logo, their logo, the one printed on every tag they hung. She turned the envelope so they could see it. And finally, one of them began to understand. She opened her mouth, tried to find a word, an explanation, a rewind. But none came, because how do you speak to someone you just denied? Once you realized they signed your paychecks. She picked up the dress, didn't fold it, didn't ask, just walked into the fitting room. No one stopped her, because ownership doesn't knock. It walks in. The fitting room was smaller than she remembered. Same minimalist white walls, same full-length mirror, same track lighting designed to flatter only those who had already decided they belonged. It had been her idea to make the mirrors borderless, so customers wouldn't feel boxed in. But now, surrounded by sterile perfection, she saw a version of her dream that had been carefully polished into alienation. She removed her sweatshirt, unfolded the dress, slipped it on slowly, methodically, like muscle memory. The silk moved like water over her shoulders, hugging her waist exactly the way it had on the mannequin she'd sculpted by hand during that sleepless January 3 years ago. The seams sat where her fingers had first stitched the prototype. The silhouette whispered every inch of her struggle, grace built from grit. She stood there quietly, in front of the mirror, staring not at her reflection, but through it, not admiring, remembering. On the other side of the door, the two sales associates were no longer whispering. They stood frozen behind the counter, the contract still unopened, the reality settling across their polished surfaces like dust no duster could sweep away. They hadn't just embarrassed a customer. They'd insulted a legacy. And now, for the first time in their carefully choreographed careers, they didn't know how to recover. She stepped out. The dress shimmered with motion, not light. It wasn't loud, but it commanded. It wasn't expensive, but it was priceless. The boutique, for a moment, stilled. One shopper paused mid-payment. Another lowered her sunglasses. Even the ambient music seemed to soften, as if the room itself recognized its designer had arrived. And now it was hers again. She walked to the center of the store, not to make a scene, but to reclaim space. One of the shoppers approached her, young, nervous, clutching a different version of the same dress in a muted shade. She asked where she got it. The woman smiled and pointed to the tag. "There," she said. "I made it." The girl blinked, then understood. It spread from there. No announcement, just recognition. In less than 10 minutes, the store's entire dynamic shifted. Buyers asked questions. People looked up from their phones. The energy moved from curated silence to collective discovery. Not of celebrity, but of origin. And in that space, something remarkable happened. She saw her brand again. Not the version behind glass, but the one stitched into others. Before leaving, she walked back to the counter, picked up the contract, and made one note at the bottom with her pen. A simple line. Boutique license suspended effective immediately. She didn't raise her voice, didn't gloat. She simply laid the pen down and turned. And with the same ease with which she walked in, she walked out past the glass, past the rope, past every assumption. Still wearing the dress. Still owning every thread. The city always watched from a distance. It remembered faces only when they became fixtures, and by the time a name was known, its story had already been rewritten. So when word began to circulate about the incident at the boutique quietly, virally, without PR management, it came not as a shock, but as a question. Who is she really? Those who thought they knew her were silent. Because the truth was simple. They had admired the brand. They had praised the clothes. But they had never imagined the mind and the muscle behind it. Now she had stepped into her own myth. After the boutique incident, her inbox was flooded. Retailers wanted clarity. Editors wanted exclusives. Brand strategists offered to spin the moment into a campaign. She ignored them all. Instead, she called her production lead. Told her to pause external shipments. Told her to clear the next 7 days. She had work to do. Not in boardrooms. In the workshop. She returned to her original studio, the one above the corner bookstore, with cracked windows and a door that stuck in the rain. The place where she learned how to sew around bad lighting and moldy ceiling tiles. The smell of raw fabric still hung in the air. She sat at her first table, cleared the dust, opened a fresh sketch pad, and began again. Not to rebrand, but to restore. In the days that followed, she launched something unheard of. A limited release called the Archive Drop. Each piece was handmade. No PR campaign. No influencer rollout. Just a post on her personal page with one sentence. Designed before you knew my name. Each dress came signed. And with it a printed copy of the original receipt from her first sale, $47.10. People cried receiving them. Because they weren't buying fabric. They were buying story. The industry didn't know how to respond. Fashion shows requested her. She declined. Luxury retailers doubled their bids for exclusivity. She passed. Even celebrities began reaching out privately, asking for pieces. She said yes to a few, but only to those who had once bought her dresses off folding tables long before the tags were gold and the press was interested. And then came the offer. A legacy house. Old money couture. The kind of name stitched into museum glass and whispered through ballrooms. They offered acquisition. $70 million. All cash. Full creative control retained. She read the email twice. Closed her laptop. And didn't answer. Because she hadn't built her name to trade it. She had built it to wear it. And right now, the world wasn't seeing a brand. It was seeing the woman who dared to thread herself into every seam. Back in the studio, she packaged one last archive drop herself. Wrapping tissue folded perfectly. Tag placed precisely. She sealed it with a red thread instead of tape. A nod to her first dress. The one she was told she couldn't afford. The one she now rewrote history in. She returned to the boutique. Not for revenge. For reclamation. It was raining that day, the kind of steady, soft rain that glossed the sidewalks and made everything feel cinematic. She didn't wear the dress this time. She wore the uniform of the beginning, worn jeans, white sneakers, and a heavy black coat from her market stall days. The boutique was empty. A quiet void of elegance and awkwardness. The franchise owner stood at the counter, nervously rearranging non-existent dust. He looked up. Froze. Then spoke, first, fumbling. We didn't know, he said. She nodded. A gesture of acknowledgement, not forgiveness. Because what they had done wasn't unique. It was systemic. Scripted. It had happened to people like her, like thousands of others, for decades in places just like this. Spaces built to be beautiful but not inclusive. Prestigious but not welcoming. Expensive but never truly valuable. She walked past him. Into the back room. It was just as she remembered it from her original inspection, sterile, silent, hollow. Racks of dresses hung with tags like trophies. But none of them felt alive. They were echoes. Replicas of something once real. She unzipped a bag. Inside, the original prototype of the dress. The one from the napkin sketch. The one with imperfect stitches, uneven darts, and raw courage sewn into every inch. She hung it in the center of the boutique. No price tag. No description. Just a small handwritten card beside it. Before you sold it, I bled for it. Then she turned to the owner and said 4 words. Not a threat. Not a warning. A final instruction. We're pulling the line. Within 48 hours, her designs vanished from every boutique bearing that name. Online listings emptied. Storefront mannequins undressed. Brand reps scrambled to explain the loss. She didn't give interviews. She let silence do what press could not. Then she launched House Return. Not a brand. A building. A space with no mirrors, no gatekeeping, no salespeople pretending to evaluate value. A studio showroom hybrid open to the public. Come try, touch, learn. Her seamstresses worked in open view. Customers watched fittings happen live. No glass walls. No whispering sales floor. Every dress was labeled with time instead of price. 17 hours, hand-dyed silk. 3 hands touched this. People cried in that space. Not because it was beautiful, because it was honest. Students began arriving in waves. Young designers. Mothers with hidden sketchbooks. Daughters who had never worn something made by someone who looked like them. She greeted them all. Not with flash. With stories. Not with approval. With space. And in the background, the fashion world shifted. One brand at a time. Slowly but visibly. Influence, it turned out, didn't belong to the loudest. It belonged to the truest. And the truth? Was that a girl once laughed out of a fitting room was now redesigning the room itself. She stood on the mezzanine of House Return, gazing down at the floor where it all now lived, her past, her process, her proof. Sunlight broke through the massive windows, brushing across bolts of fabric, spools of thread, worn machines, and eager hands. It was the same building that once denied her access to a studio space. Now, her name was etched into the glass at the entrance, not for vanity, but as a record. Beneath it. Made for all who were told no. The boutique that once dismissed her quietly closed within the year. No statement. No farewell sale. Just a darkened window where mannequins used to stand. In its place came a neighborhood co-op. With sewing lessons on Sundays. With racks of clothes donated by local designers. And no mirrors, just open fitting areas and handwritten notes inside each garment. You are enough before the fabric touches you. Her archive drop became an annual event. Not a capsule collection. A pilgrimage. Each piece a new story stitched from her memories and the voices of those who came to share theirs. People sent letters from around the world. Photos of daughters wearing dresses passed down. Grandmothers writing in halting cursive about the first time they saw themselves in a design not made for someone else's fantasy. She read every one, then folded them into fabric. Literally. She started weaving messages into lining. Tiny phrases in cursive thread, words of resilience, of reclamation. Wearers would discover them later, by accident, like buried treasure. A secret between them and the hands that made the garment real. One day, a young girl walked into House Return, clutching a crumpled sketch. Afraid to speak. Eyes wide. Palms sweaty. She looked like her. Not just in skin or hair or posture, but in hunger. That hunger to create. To prove she could belong in rooms that weren't built for her. She knelt beside the girl. Took the paper. Smoothed it out. And said, "Let's make it together." She never needed another showroom. Never launched another campaign. Because she didn't sell fabric anymore. She sold permission. To dream. To design. To become. When she passed, many, many years later, there was no headline more true than the one taped by hand to the House Return window by a former student. They said she couldn't afford the dress, but she made one the world could finally wear.